The more people that can get engaged, even though these scripts have not been written, statutes don't exist, the case law is not there. It's an unbelievably wonderful opportunity for people who want to take initiative and be the one to actually pick up a pen and write it. Don't wait on others to advance this. If you're interested, now's the time to step in the arena.
I'm very optimistic about opportunities for landmen in the future, as long as you can evolve your skill set and be proactive about how and where you can provide your services. Landmen do land work. If you can keep that perspective, you'll stay busy and you will continue to be a landman tomorrow.
Land insights, market trends, industry experts. Welcome to the Land Department Podcast, the state of land and energy as we see it.
Brent, we are coming up on I think 2 weeks and the Landman show comes out on Paramount. It's the big talk. Biggest question for you is how many pump jacks did you light on fire when you were out in the field?
Oh man, I got 2 this morning. I've been throwing Molotov cocktails. It's, I've already sniped 3 field landmen for double billing me. It's been so dramatic over here. I just don't even know how to handle myself. It's great. My mustache grew longer. It's just, I'm ready to go, man.
Gosh, people are going to have the worst misconception of it. But,
As if landmen didn't already have a tough enough go of it in the reputation world.
Yes, exactly. Well, we got a great guest today that understands the world of land, and we're going to talk about landowners too. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. Brent, how did you guys meet?
Yeah, so like all things landman world, kind of the cool thing about it is I phoned a friend because I needed some guidance on something, and reached out to Raina Hornady. We were doing some work with her. I've met her through our involvement in clean techs together. Looking for a contact that I could just talk some shop on due diligence in the CCUS space. We've done a lot of acquisition work and title work supporting that, but we were going and supporting a client in an acquisition effort. They were buying into several projects and they called us to ask to help. And I just needed someone I could brainstorm with. And she recommended that I reach out to Jonathan. And so I picked up the phone and man, he answered, and hell, we talked for 45 minutes about CCUS. And, like most landman talk shop conversations go, we ended up in right field talking about all things land ownership and, energy transition and energy development and stewardship of landowners' rights and representing companies. And man, the more I talked to him, the more interesting the conversation got. So I think I ended it. Jonathan was like, "Hey man, we do this little podcast. Would you like to come on?" And of course he was kind enough to say yes and join us. So Jonathan, man, welcome. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, we have a good.
Jonathan, I'd love to give listeners just a background on yourself. How did you get to where you are today? Where did you start?
Sure. Well, after I got my undergraduate degree from Texas Tech, born and raised in Texas, and got my legal education in the state of Oklahoma, where I obtained my license to practice law. And towards the conclusion of my second year of practicing law, I was doing oil and gas transactional work, and so were a couple of my colleagues. 2 of them had moved into land full time. This is probably about 2005. And at this time, Chesapeake was breaking ground on their campus there in central Oklahoma City. And it was just a really good time. Oil was approaching, I think, $112 a barrel. Gas was trading somewhere between $10 and $12 an MCF, and was actually recruited and motivated by a couple of colleagues to entertain doing oil and gas land work full time rather than law. And that's what I started doing. And did that for about a year before incorporating my own shop, Grammar Land and Exploration Corp., which I have to this day, and very quickly developed it into a hybrid between land and legal, as I obtained one client and then another that were wanting not only your basic land skills, but also maybe legal work, assisting with title examination, title reports, and or A&D. Began to sort of experiment with finding a balance between the two. And that's evolved into a great many things. That was 20 years ago, and now encompasses a lot of different energy sources, and a lot of different services for both oil and gas and also utility, and but in both land and legal. That's kind of a nickel tour of where I am and how I got here.
Yeah. So I guess the most important question, you also obviously have a legal background, but at a party, do you claim you're the cool landman or you're an attorney? Which one is it?
Landman. Landman seems to be, and I don't mean this, I'll be, honest to the portion of thought while being respectful of the practice of law. I've noticed, even in business settings, that once that hat is disclosed, it has a tendency to push people back, as it should be. That's the nature of the trade, is to insulate and to protect and to ensure. And I've noticed in cocktail parties, either people start leaning in with all of their problems. Hey, I got this thing, this reefer's trying to, skip out on do, and or they just stop talking altogether. Whereas with land, and certainly since, the Taylor Sheridan over dramatized version has come out, it seems to be more inviting. Everybody in Texas, and we also work in Oklahoma and New Mexico, either has land or has family members that have land, and they've been approached by landmen. And it seems to generate a more, invigorating conversation. So if I'm going to mention to people that I have a law background or maintain a license, that's usually the second or third topic rather than the first.
Yeah, you're Jonathan. I've followed you and know of you. I know you're involved in a lot of boards and committees. I think, are you a director for the Texas Business Hall of Fame or Business Owners?
Sit on the board of the Texas Business Hall of Fame. That's right. That's a evolution of this past year. In fact, we've got our annual induction gala November the 13th in Dallas, and one of our inductees is in fact Taylor Sheridan.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
looking
cool.
forward to meeting up with several others: David Robinson of Antonio Spurs, Michael Boone of Haynes and Boone, and several others. But I was the Texas Business Hall of Fame. I was appointed to the board this past year, and it celebrates all the things that I care about on Texas and capitalism, and a big believer in both. So,
Yeah, that's fantastic.
How did that come about? Just folks that you met and worked with over the years, or
I was actually was on business in Dallas, and was researching, trying to find contact information for a former inductee, and began examining a little bit about the history and the purpose of the Texas Business Hall of Fame, and called the executive director on the telephone and explained who I was, and gave them sort of the nickel tour of what I was interested in, deficiencies that I saw in celebrating energy and business in Texas. A big believer in personal relationships and networking, and I've seen an enormous hiccup since COVID in that respect. And I think industry has suffered accordingly, and kind of gave them my 2 cents about what I wanted to bring to help the Texas economy flourish. And after listening to me, she said, "Would you be willing to meet with our president? He's at the Ritz-Carlton in Dallas this afternoon." And I was in the Petroleum Club, and I walked out, got my car, drove down, sat down in the lounge with him. And that Tuesday, I had an invitation to become a board member. And so far, I've enjoyed it. It's a great opportunity. We give a great deal of money to entrepreneurial recent graduates and the forms of scholarships to help them initiate their new business ideas. And it has several lunch networking events through Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio, in which young entrepreneurs, young business people, young capitalists get to meet some of the pillars of the Texas economy. So you're right. I belong to several boards in many organizations. Some are more aggressive than others. This has so far been one of the most interesting and exciting that I've been a part of, and I'm excited to be included in what they're doing.
That's fantastic. I think that's a good lesson for anybody. You're right. The last few years, we've seen a difference in COVID changed a lot of things for people. And I think it put us in a rut that
Yeah.
we need to work ourselves out of as people. And the more you can put yourself out there, the more opportunity you're going to present for yourself. You're not going to find
Yeah.
that next thing, or you're not going to stay stimulated if you're not out there hustling. It's not just going to fall in your lap. And,
Yeah. I
we tell
think
that to landmen a lot, our younger
this
guys.
technology has certainly been beneficial. I mean, this moment as an example, we're able to do this and we're all sitting in three different places. But it needs to be appropriately incorporated and
Yeah.
sort of a hybrid, a collaborative effort of getting people in a room together for just a couple of hours is irreplaceable. It's invaluable.
Yeah, Jonathan, speaking of like the collaborative effort, I know that, in prep for this podcast today, we've talked about some of the challenges that we're seeing and that you're seeing in your hybrid role as both, attorney and landman.
Yeah.
Just with all the developments in the energy industry, especially in Texas. And you have pointed to collaboration as one of the tools that needs to be used better in both the renewable space and the oil and gas space. I'd love to get just a little bit of backdrop on what you're seeing and also how you see the path forward for a lot of these projects.
Yeah. I think we talked about in some of the prep discussion about um, the need for and the value in collaboration. And in that particular conversation between solar development and oil and gas in Texas, what we are seeing is concurrent development in a lot of areas where there's either existing lease rights that an oil and gas company has to perpetuate existing production, and then also with their held acreage, prospectively looking at future development. And some of these surface tracts are going under lease to solar developers that want to develop almost the full balance of the surface for solar energy. And, these two interests are, politically sometimes very adverse to each other. And then also they're literally adverse because they're trying to develop the same ground. Lease perpetuates the rights to develop 100% of the surface as needed for cultivation, the exploration of the mineral estate. But the surface owner also has the same rights to maximize their revenue by leasing it for solar development. And what do we do when the two meet? And we certainly have seen in the last 2 years a lot of benefit to exercising and trying to cultivate a collaborative effort early on when these two energy industries meet. We represent both in different capacities, both land and legal. And it's an interesting collision. That's the best thing I can call it. There's very little law. There's very little guidance. In fact, it's a script that we get to write however we want to. And the more positively our penmanship, I think the better the results.
Exactly.
But as far as the collaborative effort, this has really become, as much as we may not like it, and these are both powerful industries, and we're not always prone to acquiescing in anything outside of our own wheelhouse. But that doesn't really produce any very good results for either side, certainly not for the owners of the mineral and surface estate, who should be our primary objective.
Yeah, I find that landmen find themselves in at least today's land business in the middle, right? As a landman, you may be working for an E&P company your entire career and be working for them presently, but also be supporting other energy companies, in the alternative space, whether it's solar or battery storage,
Yeah.
CCUS projects. And what we found is there's a skill set that landmen have where they can help either party understand the business case, understand and maybe prevent things from happening. Best way to prevent a fire is not let it start, and so
Yeah.
the more we
That's
find
right.
ourselves educating renewables companies on how do oil and gas companies operate, how's their site layout, and I get a ton of questions from our E&P clients. Hey, how do these guys go about their solar development? I get calls all the time. This is coming from clients, so they're getting approached all the time from solar developers that really are ignorant to the E&P's operations, and the E&P's ignorant to the solar development operations. So we find ourselves oftentimes trying to tell the story on both sides and helping try to come to a more collaborative relationship, a more proactive conversation between these companies, I think is prudent. And I think that's where you can see the best opportunity for success on both sides, which ultimately
Right.
helps the landowner, which ultimately helps the mineral development in the long run.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. And one of the tools that we've developed, um, and I remember you mentioned yesterday when we were going through some early stage development of today's podcast, the earlier the better. And the earlier you can get into a collaborative setting, the better. And if we're working on behalf of a solar company, and usually that's in either identifying the mineral and working interest of the state. And once we've done that, trying to be the first point of contact and outreach to start negotiating surface use, which can be developed in a lot of different ways. It's really a conversation that can't be avoided of just meeting on the ground. And hopefully everybody says, well, I want to put my hardware here. I want to put my hardware here. And if they're the same spot, then that's where the creative discussion begins. And before we have even reached out to an E&P company, after we've identified the boundaries of their leasehold, we prepare a geological assessment. Whether it's what they show internally or not, it's very irrelevant. It's just to really show the gestures. We've pulled well logs from all of the offsets. We've mapped the subsurface. We pulled from the Railroad Commission, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and I have a geologist on staff that works for me, and he'll prepare a stratigraphic column and to present to an oil company. We know where the trend may or may not go. And you show this to your geologist, reservoir engineer, and we're trying to structure our panels accordingly to preserve your future drilling rights. Whether that ends up being the final product or not is really immaterial. What it's shown is we're coming into this primarily concerned first and foremost, to the extent we put up our own money, to make sure your rights are protected. And that just invites reciprocal behavior.
Exactly.
It's very difficult for a DMV company to plant their feet once you've done that strategically, is to come with an olive branch to some extent. And listen, we've already put a great deal of diligence because we understand this is going to be really problematic. That has been received. I've had 100% success so far. Now, we haven't inked up agreements. It's still challenging, but I've invoked narrative and conversation 100% of the time with that. Once you lead with that understanding, rather than here's where our solar panels are going, sign off on this waiver so we can move on down the road, which unfortunately has been used a great deal by even clients that we've represented.
Yeah, unsuccessfully in large part.
Yeah, that's not going to fly in the state of Texas or anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, there are enough challenges with getting for the example, we're using a solar development to construction as it is. Tremendous challenges, whether it's takeaway capacity, insurability, all the things that get in the way, financing. I think the industry on the alternative side is starting to recognize that one of the bigger challenges is the co-development side of things. And the worst thing you could do, it's negotiation 101. If you walk in the door and upset someone or insult someone's time or waste their time or insult their intelligence, boy, you've got an uphill battle. So, we really push and encourage our clients to act prudently, do their research, to your point, do their homework, and come at it in the sense of what can we do to best support the landowner? What can we do to best support your desire and absolute need to make money? And then how can we fit in that and make money as well? These are business to business transactions. And, it's not always about dollars and cents. How much can I pay you to get out of the way? There's no amount of money you can give an E&P to interrupt their future development plans or their future potential to transact on that asset, sell part of it.
Well, and something I want to add to that that's elevated the level is that, when you and I started our careers, it was nothing to be going out and leasing 10, 50, 100,000 acres, landmen running all over the place. We don't live in a wildcat exploration time period right now. It's all about development of your core asset. A lot of holding ground, a lot of status quo. HBP acreage has become everything. It's on companies' balance sheets. They've leveraged it. They have plans to develop it. They're not acquiring new acreage to go explore new areas. And so all of this acreage that's held under lease rights is now probably twice as valuable as it was, making it even more challenging. So the defense of, well, you don't have a well there, you're not drilling there right now. This acreage now may be all this company has for the next 5 to 10 years. And so their infill drilling has become, paramount to the valuation of their company. And so it really is, we live in challenging times, but that doesn't mean that they need to be defeated. It just means minds have to get a lot sharper and creative.
They do. And that's where the value of experience in these kind of negotiations and understanding the true value. I mean, we've all seen the cost of a defected asset in an oil and gas due diligence situation. It's well in excess of $300 or $400 an acre that you may be throwing at a company to give you surface accommodation. I mean, it's serious money, and it should be treated with that kind of respect in those negotiations. We spend a lot of time talking about, co-solar development. I mean, and that's the obvious big one, right? That's the one that's the most challenging. What are some of the other types of co-development scenarios that you've run across between oil and gas and alternatives?
Two right now. I don't know that one is necessarily between oil and gas and alternatives, but the carbon storage co-development of now the subsurface is very similarly aligned in terms of accommodation with respect to storage in pore space. Again, of which there's very little legal guidance in Texas for ownership, though the vast majority of other states' legal conclusions and common and statutory law would suggest that pore space belongs to the surface owner, not the mineral owner. That raises an interesting problem when storage reservoirs that are being leased for carbon storage overlie potential mineral development and the deep rights. And you can see theoretically the problem where you're trying to concurrently develop now the subsurface. You've injected a plume of industrial carbon dioxide at, say, 6,500 feet. 3,500 is about the requisite minimum threshold for the pressure requirements on down to, all depths below. But 55 to 6,500 is around where some of the other successful storage projects have been in the country. Well, in Texas, in areas like the Eagle Ford, certainly the Permian Basin, Woodbine Sands in East Texas, Cotton Valley, these all underlie those depths. And so what do you do if you have an E&P company with lease rights below? The mineral owners that have future potential development to lease unleased minerals below that stratum. There's not a lot of experience out there, proven drill through of a CO2 storage reservoir. There's not a lot of guidance from the EPA on how that's even effectively done. And so that's probably the similar predicament in the subsurface between CO2 storage and oil and gas development. The other one is between produced water and the potential extraction of lithium. You now have a very convoluted argument, certainly given Supreme Court renderings. It's, Cactus versus COG operating versus use of produced water in oil and gas development. That's been rendered the property of the operator if it's produced collaterally to oil and gas development. Well, we've also been able to identify traces, commercial quantities of lithium that can be potentially pulled out of that water. Now you have a resource with conflicting ownership. Is the lithium inside there part of the water estate or is it part of the mineral estate?
And if part of the operators is the working interest estate under the oil and gas.
You've got the operator, the surface, and the mineral owner, and a product that just a few years ago nobody really cared about, and now has extremely high potential value, 15,000 a metric of a ton if you can extract it and carbonize it and deliver it to battery manufacturers. So, it's not just in one particular area, as is the evolution of energy development. As we try to maximize all of these resources, or just a few years ago, we were really interested in
And all
one.
of the skills and all the technical ability. I mean, that's what we're
Yeah.
able to do so much now. And we're seeing E&P companies evolve. They're not just oil and gas producers. I mean, all the majors out there are doing CCUS. They're looking into lithium extraction. They're co-developing solar projects to power their refining capabilities and processing capabilities in the field. It's crashing, right? There's so much going on, and we're all trying to figure out who is what and how. But it's
Well,
an
you
exciting
said this
time.
yesterday, is that you hold yourself out now as an energy land company.
Yes.
Not just oil and gas, it's not necessarily petroleum land work anymore at it, because the companies themselves are becoming energy conglomerates. They're involved in all of these aspects, rather. Certainly the majors are leading that charge. Look at Exxon. They're the leaders in
Absolutely.
carbon storage. They're leading the charge in Arkansas with lithium, largest fully integrated oil company in the world still. So, you're going to see that trend continue to trickle down from the majors to the midsize and ultimately the independents.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, there's still a lot of confusion, or not confusion, uncertainty. I think everybody has an
Uncertain-
idea as to how this is going to shake out, what the courts are going to rule, how the case law will shake out. But I still feel like we've got some time before we really can have a clear picture on who owns what and
There's no
how we can
question
proceed
about
as land professionals.
And the only way to advance that timetable is for people to take initiative. Again, I don't know if it's just post-COVID or if it's just a period in evolution of humanity. There's we seem to be a very sideline anxious culture. And the more people that can get engaged, even though these scripts have not been written, the statutes don't exist, the case law is not there, it's an unbelievably wonderful opportunity for people who want to take initiative and be the one to actually pick up the pen and write it.
Yeah, somebody's got to write the
These
script.
industries forward. Don't wait on others to advance this. If you're interested, now's the time to step in the arena.
Yeah, I mean, it's the American dream, right? You can write your future if
Yeah.
you put in some
We
hard
have the
work.
ability to direct it where we want it to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's I've got a great, it's so funny you mentioned that. I wrote a scripture down yesterday from my devotional. I just wanted to read it. And it is totally random. The lazy do not roast any game, but the diligent feed on the riches of the hunt. That's Proverbs 12:27.
Very
And
good.
it is just so fitting. It applies to business. It applies to, I've got a teenage son and a 11-year-old daughter. You make your future, it goes on you, and hard work and
Well, yeah.
committing yourself to something, and I think that's, the industry has always done that, especially on our side of the business, the energy business, the oil and gas business, very much trailblazers and this arena. And I think ultimately we will get there. We will provide clarity in Texas. Gosh, if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be Texas. We're the energy leader in the United States. And I'm excited about it. We're all excited about the opportunities, frankly, that it provides for landmen.
We did a devotional this morning too. We pulled from Romans 12:5. We, though many in Christ, form one body, each member belonging to all the others. And we speak that to my wife and I, to each other, to our children, is regardless of your individual capacities, we're all bound together to serve one purpose. And certainly in energy, I think that could be no more so true, is not our own individual lobbies and our own bottom lines, but service to the state of Texas to cultivate as much energy development as we can. Certainly if you're in pursuit of independence and security, we really don't have the luxury to not cultivate each one of these things simultaneously, because we owe it to the state itself. To your point, Texas is the reason we're the Lone Star State. Everybody looks to us to set the precedent. The responsibility is high, because everyone else, The other 49 states pale in comparison, and albeit so too is the rest of the world. Texas is the energy leader for not just the country, but the entire planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You brought up a great point yesterday, and I think it ties in exactly into that same purpose that you just mentioned, that your mind shifted a little bit a few years ago in terms of how you're serving, and you wanted to be of more service to the landowner, and you saw kind of a shift happening. And I'd love for you to share kind of how that was sparked for you originally, and then how that
Sure.
is playing today out in what we see.
Yeah, a shift in identifying what I foresaw then and do now as a risk of the exploration of sort of traditional revenue streams that have made a lot of this land possible for many generations and is terming out well over a century of land was settled for the purpose of cultivating agriculture. And then it was made possible early in the 20th century by oil and gas production in a lot of regions. A lot of those revenue sources, for various reasons, again, I think we talked about we're losing the baby boomer generation. A lot of these trade skills are not being passed down maybe like they used to. Rural communities are not necessarily in a period of attraction as they are in people are migrating out. And certainly in West Texas, where we're seeing problems with the aquifer in terms of recharge and extraction. And even some of the financial data that we've looked at about whatever is causing the pivot we're going through in the climate, whether it's industrial or whether it's just environmental, doesn't really make any difference to me. It's drier and hotter. It's getting a lot harder to cultivate property to make a living to hold on to it. And that's going to be very important when the next generation takes it over here very, very soon. How are you going to satisfy maintenance of property for people that no longer live on it and no longer make money off of it, which has been in generations past. Certainly my grandparents were able to do that. That's not necessarily possible. And a lot of these properties are going up for sale. And for the first time, because those reasons apply to all other landowners, they're not being purchased by other farmers and ranchers and landowners nearby. They're being purchased by outside interests. And a lot of these properties that I've seen, people that have come to me that are either neighbors or acquaintances, sometimes clients, sometimes people that we've crossed with transmission or pipelines or taken leases on, are going through this evolution and are between finding enough money to make the property sustainable or putting it up for sale. And as we talked about, prices in Texas are ranging from $3,500 to $10,000 to $20,000 an acre. Brent and I both, visited yesterday that when we were young, we had the dream about buying that 100, 200, 300 acre ranch in Texas. That's going to run you a cool $2-3 million now without improvements.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of people either can afford or if they can are willing to spend that kind of money for secondary rural property. And so they're going to corporate interests, usually sometimes outside the community and oftentimes outside the state. And that bothers me. And I think it's important to keep interest local and certainly statewide is how can we bring as many opportunities for landowners in rural areas. 65% of the state is classified as working. That's either ag, forestry, or cattle country to generate enough money so that they could keep property and so can their heirs without having to support it from outside collateral income. And that's when I really started seeing and sort of surrendering. I'm an oil and gas guy, or I'm a renewable guy, or I'm a carbon storage guy. I really want to explore all these opportunities from this sort of local security standpoint so that we can, if there's a potential for one of these energy sources to make money for landowners, I want to be sure we're bringing these opportunities to each and every one of them. And thus, that's kind of how our career, my career and my companies have evolved is from that standpoint. And we've surrendered a lot of the political lobby because we don't necessarily bat for one industry over the other. If it makes money and it's deployable commercially, I really want to see what applications there are all over the state for the benefit of the state, people who live there.
Yeah. I think that's we've seen a shift in that. And I echo everything that Jonathan says. I mean, the best thing about rural America is the sense and the feel of community. And when people can't afford to keep property that's been in their family for multiple generations, that's where you start to lose community. And to Jonathan's point, how we've all had the dream of owning property. I think that's, the American dream: own your business, build your career, own some land, own a home, all that. And that's been a big push of ours. And we're working on behalf of alternative energy companies as landmen to educate landowners on, hey, this is a mechanism that can provide a revenue stream that can allow this land to stay in your family. Oftentimes we're dealing with people who, baby boomer generations, right? They're looking at the next 5 to 10 years of, what do I do with this property? They're at the end of life. They're maybe wanting to pass it on.
Yeah.
And they either have kids or don't have kids that can afford it. And if they can't afford to maintain that property or afford the taxes when it changes hands, the alternative and energy development is a mechanism for them to be able to sustain that property, to Jonathan's point, in their family. And we've seen a shift. The more we can talk to landowners and help show that there are opportunities out there, the more that these companies, from the business side, recognize that there are multiple ways that you can develop a piece of land. I mean, we're negotiating and working on projects in Southeast Texas right now where we're negotiating with a landowner who's got a CCUS lease in place. They're looking at a solar development over the top of that. Had a great conversation between a solar developer and a CCUS developer. Again, trying to encourage that collaboration. And we're doing all that on behalf of the landowner. And this is land that's been in this family's name for 4 or 5 generations. This is going to provide financial security for them. Instead of growing rice, they're growing solar panels and harvesting and holding CCUS. And that land's going to stay in their family. That's starting to become more commonplace, and people are starting to recognize that as a means to sustain their property. And that's ultimately what you want to see. And I think anybody can get behind that.
I think from a practical standpoint too, and I've seen this in just in sort of dual energy sources, and I think you'll see it evolve to even more, is rather than one company getting the solar rights and one company getting the carbon storage rights and one having the oil and gas lease and one doing the wind and one getting the lithium rights, you're starting to see leases evolve where oil and gas companies they're including the lithium. I think you'll see, I've suggested in several occasions finding solar leases in place and modify them to include carbon storage rights, is I think you'll start to see lease forms where companies would be intelligent to go ahead and lease everything. To lease solar, have a negotiation clause in there for solar, carbon storage, lithium, oil and gas. It's going to be problematic in the early stages because companies they're not designed that way. But as they evolve, it's going to make a lot of sense to just go ahead and address concurrent development right out of the chute, because you are seeing multiple entities that now have rights above and below each other. It would be best to just get one lease that covers all of them. Then you can trade those things out as you see fit as the leaseholder, if you're a company. Because to your point, that's the sort of hybrid concurrent we're seeing, is a lot of these larger landowners are entertaining solar, carbon storage, maybe oil and gas if they're in the Eagle Ford and Permian. So they've got 3 or 4 things on their plate already. It makes sense to just give them one form, one document agreement with one company. I think you'll start to see that. I think you already are.
Absolutely. And that was a big, I mentioned the conversation I had with the 2 companies last week. That was driven by the landowner's request. The landowner says, look, I've got this agreement in place with company A for CCUS development. I do not want to impede that. I made a deal with these people. I want to do this solar development as well, but I need you 2 guys to talk. I need y'all to get on the same page, and I need to make sure, for our solar development client, that we have the proper language to allow that co-development. And the conversation that we set up was great. It could be a whole other podcast, but it was all centered around, what do you need? How do you need to develop your asset? Mr. CCUS company. And then the CCUS companies are, how do you need to develop your solar project? And a lot of factors come into play there. We talked about, the site location for the injection wells, the monitoring wells that happen on CCUS projects. The other big takeaway was we needed to account for language for the seismic that needs to be shot on those CCUS projects every 4 or 5 years. And that was a whole other factor that the solar company had not considered. Where are those trucks going to need to go? Has seismic been shot over this already? What were those paths, for your shaker trucks and everything? And the more informed and the farther that conversation went, the more clarity that our solar development client had on how they maybe needed to go about structuring their lease with the landowner. And we actually left it at the end where there's potential partnership from a B2B standpoint between the two companies for power purchasing and all those things. So,
that's great. Those are resolutions I like to hear.
Oh,
where you
man.
end up putting people together to help benefit both of their businesses just by being a little bit open to the discussion. That's
Open
what
to
we
the
want.
discussion
That's
and proactive in your
Yeah.
thinking. We tell landmen, be proactive, not reactive. And the more
Yeah,
experience and
sure.
the more open you are to learning about the environment, the energy space, what's out there, the more proactive you can be and the more value you can provide to your clients. You and I are in the service industry. People hire us because of our expertise and our experience on both sides in the energy business. Be proactive about talking about that. No client is going to shush you over thinking proactively and trying to provide opportunities that can maybe help them down the line. And that'll keep you in business and it'll keep you working as a landman.
Well
Huge
put.
benefit to the landowner as well, right? I mean, that's like
Absolutely.
we mentioned, because they're able to come to that collaboration and that agreement. It helps and benefits the landowner, like we mentioned. So, really interesting, Jonathan. I want to hear from you a little bit about where you see the trajectory for land. Like we've already talked about how Dudley Land has become the energy, delivering energy through land, right, and focusing on energy as a whole. What are there, trends do you see happening in land, and where do you think it's going?
Where do I think it's going? I guess the first answer to your question that comes to mind is the word slow. I don't know if this is going to be good for the final airing, but I want to be real careful. I feel like at least I've tried to bring a great deal of optimism to this discussion today, but there is a reality, certainly when we're talking about carbon storage and how that benefits landowners. That's probably the longest ball that we're driving out of all of this. I'm not a huge believer, as is our team. The narrative I think that's been advanced for a lot of this development is a little bit more energetic probably than the timetable that it's going to take to deploy it. And carbon storage, where's the crown as far as that's concerned? These are a lot of optimistic ideas that I'm excited about, encouraged, but it's going to take a lot longer than I think maybe the social media narrative would have you believe.
I agree.
And so in answer to your question, where I see land going is somewhat unclear, even though I seem to be, I feel like I'm and many other clear-minded about where we need to take it. When it gets there, it is still up in the open because you have mindsets that are changing. You have regulatory bodies that do not have laws in place. To Brent's point, there's a lot of misinformation and a lack of understanding. And so wherever it is I see land going, I don't know, this is probably the answer you wanted. I see it taking quite a bit of time to get there. And that's important to know because money's going to get impatient. People are going to get impatient. Legislators are going to get impatient. And the people that are going to benefit right now are those that have their minds fixed on 2030. Whether you're a landowner, whether you're a businessman, whether you're an investor, an energy developer, if you can move at a patient pace while land and energy is in a massive pivot that a lot of people don't understand, some don't appreciate, some don't recognize. Between now and the end of the decade, you're really going to see a lot go over the waterfall into what will be for the next 100 years. And that's we need to be patient. And so, as far as advancing all of this quickly, which many, many people seem to want, certainly investors and certainly people that manage projects, this is really going to take time to cultivate to get it where we want it to go. It's the third time I've said it. I don't know if that's an answer that exactly you were looking for, but that's the first
Oh,
thing
it's
that
great.
came to mind is this is going to take time. And for those in energy that have their crosshairs fixed 18 to 24 to 36 months out, I think you need to double that. And if you will, I think you're going to come out probably twice as good as you may think you are. But you're going to have to look a lot further to the
Yeah.
horizon, I think.
You're exactly right, Jonathan. There's a lot of excitement, obviously. I mean, you just think about what the last 4 to 5 years has done to our business and the things that we're involved in now that we weren't 4 years ago. 4 years is an extremely short amount of time in the grand scheme of things, and taking an energy or a business from zero to, or an industry from zero to where we need it to be or want it to be. I think that's there's a lot of challenges. I think the best companies obviously will survive. We're already starting to see that in some of these instances where companies are starting to transact. Some are starting to fall off. Others are consolidating and grabbing the top tier assets because they have the highest opportunity for development. We've got a tremendous amount of infrastructure that has to be built in the state. Nobody seems to want to talk about that. I mean, eminent domain is a very difficult conversation to have, and no landowner wants to have that conversation. But the fact is, if we're going to develop all this energy and this electricity, we've got to be able to move it, and we've got to have the capacity to move that. So we've got to tackle that challenge, and that's unfortunately not something that is done quickly. It needs to be done properly and with the proper amount of attention and sensitivity to the environment, to landowners' rights, to the greater public's right to be able to utilize this power and all this advancement in technology that we have. I think you're absolutely right. I think we're starting to see kind of more of the trend over the last year, and you probably experienced this as well, Jonathan, and more of the direct power purchase agreements where you're not feeding a grid with your project, you're feeding a data center. You're feeding a fulfillment center, whatever it might be. I think the data centers are going to be an interesting development over the next few years with the advancement of AI technology and just the sheer amount of power that they need to run these projects. And then you couple that with the Permian Basin. What was it? Permian Basin Energy Initiative, where the sheer amount of power that's needed for us to fully develop the Permian Basin from an oil and gas standpoint is just, it's tremendous. The state of Texas is going to make a lot of investment in that to be able to feed that industry and their needs in West Texas. And all that takes time. Time is, investors don't like long-term type turnarounds, but I think that's just what it is. It's good for landmen. That's going to continue to provide opportunities for landmen to be of service and to handle these more sophisticated type agreements and negotiations and projects, which is great. We'll go through ebbs and flows of optimism in the land business, but frankly, from my standpoint, I'm very optimistic about opportunities for landmen in the future, as long as you can evolve your skill set and be proactive about how and where you can provide your services. I say it all the time: landmen do land work. And if you can keep that perspective, you will stay busy and you will continue to be a landman tomorrow. So, Jonathan, I mean, I think everybody's on the same page and understands that this is going to be a long play for, the all of the above thought of energy development in the state of Texas and across the country, obviously. But with that, what do we see and what are your thoughts on maybe the low hanging fruit? What are some of the projects that are the most ripe for development and to get to a more full scale, more high scale production of energy development on the alternative side?
Your biggest challenge is always going to be proof of concept. And so certainly I'm the most encouraged and interested the most in carbon storage. That's probably going to be the longest one because you really don't have an industrial size proof of concept yet. And with the revitalization of Petronova down in Fort Bend County, a lot of the projects that are being talked about down in Bayou Bend, as soon as you have one up and operational that people can actually see, I think you're going to see the momentum pick up tremendously. And so to that point, at some point, you're going to see a lot of investor dollars start to triculate back to, I think, oil and gas, to be honest with you, just because you can see it and it's working. I think there's a real future for hydrocarbons, despite a lot of the political and media narrative. People like to put money into and regulate things that they can actually see. And so much of the new projected energy transition industries, they're still going to be relying upon technology that hasn't been refined yet. To that point, I personally am encouraged about lithium because DLE is not as far removed from a commercial application, maybe as some of the other things. And to use your point, low hanging fruit, I think the branches are a little bit lower down the tree. The timetable is a little bit shorter, and maybe some of the CapEx expenditures that are required is a little lower. And we see advancement not necessarily predicated upon the EV market so much as large scale battery storage and lithium batteries and cell phones and computers seem to be a pretty stable market. One I don't think anybody disagrees is going to continue to advance. Whether or not carbon emission reduction maintains itself over the next 5 to 10 years is a little bit more questionable because so much of it is based on the tax credits that were elevated under the IRA.
Exactly.
And so until that hesitancy has been alleviated, I think the path of least resistance will probably fall more into the lithium extraction. We're actually seeing dirt moved in Exxon in Arkansas and Northeast Texas. So the best answer is that which is the closest to proof of concept, because we as humans like to see things. And so I think you'll probably see the next 2 or 3 years, you have solar and wind and oil and gas. These industries have been fairly well proven, albeit in need of technological advances. But between carbon storage and lithium, which I think are probably your gold and silver medal transition topics in Texas, I'm more confident that live faster pace just because of the availability of tangibility of seeing how it's done.
Yeah.
I think that's, I would agree with that. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of activity in that space. I guess it was within the last 2 weeks, a lot of big publications about the reserves or the anticipated reserves in the Smackover formation, and that covers 3 states.
Right.
So very interested to see where that takes us as landmen and helps in that all of the above energy transition kind of mentality. You certainly have the right players. I mean, Equinor is obviously investing a lot of money in it. They're a massive international company. Exxon's so active there as well. And they have the technology in place and established to be able to deliver on that. Other things that I think about that, maybe are a little further behind is geothermal. But the concept there that the technology and the mechanism and means to develop a geothermal project is largely based off of the technology that's been established and perfected and refined in the oil and gas business. Now, you think of companies like Sage Geosystems, they're taking essentially, plucking the best and brightest that they can get from the oil and gas business and using that engineering capacity, that technological capacity, all the innovation that's gotten us to where we are today in the oil and gas space and applying it to geothermal.
Right.
I think we can advance that. I think there's a lot of promise for that. I think if I talk to, as I talk to people in the land business and the oil and gas business, my counterparts in land, on the in-house side of things, they all say geothermal makes a lot of sense. Everybody's behind that concept. So I'd be interested to see, it's really exciting to see 10 years from now, how many of our clients as service providers are going to be drilling oil and gas wells and then also have geothermal projects in the mix. I think we all are optimistic that could be something that could also be thrown into the mix for us all as well, and provide provide electricity generation in parts of the country that aren't oil and gas centric. I think one of the things I've talked to my team about a lot is, we all came up in Texas or Oklahoma or heavy oil and gas producing regions, but we better be prepared to do this same work in other parts of the country that are going to have a bigger slice of the pie in alternative energy development, whether it's geothermal or whatever the case may be. So I think the big takeaway is, it's going to be a ride, and you better try to get on the front row seat so that you can be proactive about where you position yourself as a landman or an energy professional. And, it's exciting times. And I think we're all optimistic for where it's going to take us and what it can maybe provide for the country. And from an economic standpoint, from a energy independent standpoint, I think all those things are positives that anybody can get behind. And if the environment's better for it, great. Who wouldn't get behind that? But Jonathan,
Right.
God, man, you great insights. You obviously have a wealth of knowledge and a ton of experience, and you're a great champion for the business and a great representation for landmen as well. So thank you for joining.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
absolutely.
We'll
Thank
do
you
it
for your
again, man.
perspective and for your wisdom. We'd love to have you on again. And yeah, maybe we'll catch up after we've all watched Landman on Paramount.
That'd be my pleasure. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Enjoyed today's topic? Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Learn more at dudley-land.com. See you next episode.